Hello and welcome to Wired for Wonder. My name is Lori Kirkland, and I am excited to be joined today by Luigi Lenguito, who is the CEO and founder of BforeAI. Welcome to the podcast.
Lori, nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Well, as we get into Wired for Wonder, right, we really like to talk to leaders who are thinking about what the future of work could look like. What does that mean for us as individual leaders? What does it look like for leading teams in the time of AI? As we get into the conversation, do you just want to give us a real brief background of yourself, maybe 30 seconds or a minute about kind of what got you to where you are today?
Absolutely. Listen, I'm, very passionate about computing. I started when I was 4 years old. 43 years later, still using the same keyboard. Very lucky that my father put me in front of this first IBM PC. And I think this topic is really, really dear to my heart. I was among probably the first flexible worker at Dell Computer, being fully remote more than 20 years ago. So I've seen the evolution of the space. I've now created a company BforeAI where we are fully distributed in 34 countries, no office, working from anywhere, fully asynchronous. So we stretch even the definition of today, work models, and really excited about the opportunity that this gives. I find it's much more empowering for the individual, better for the environment, greater for the business. So it's a total win, and it's just such a shame to see many people resisting to it and not getting the benefits, immediately. But I'm sure it's changing, and I'm sure we'll cover some of the topics now. So.
Well, no, and that's such an interesting topic, right? Because it's like we had the pandemic, which was a global reset. And right, for a lot of us, right, basically everyone had the time to stop and think about what do we value? Oh, it's our
Mhm.
time. What's important to us, right? How do we look at work? We all look at it differently, right? After the pandemic. And one of the big issues is we're more remote versus in office. And that issue, I feel like there's a lot of conversations around. I, like you, have worked since 2007 remotely and know that I'm actually a more productive, better worker, better connector when I am remote. But I do love people. So I love going in the office too, right? Like I get a lot of energy. So I love that you are what do you think is one of the surprising benefits that other leaders may not see about going fully remote?
Well, before touching on that, I think let's also recognize that this is not for everybody, right? There is actually a category of people that do need that social space of the office because, frankly, that's their life, and so the question is, I think, often, and especially now with social media, we tend to kind of polarize ourselves in black and white. You know, life is a rainbow, right? There are so many different variation of things, and we need to be conscious that there is no one right and wrong, but there are decisions you take that obviously influence, right? And so, to your point, I'll make an example. One of the benefits that I'm seeing as a society and that people don't realize is that distributed work enable people to work away from big cities, reviving the economy of second tier, third tier cities that were disappearing. Right? I'm Italian. In Italy, is recognized there are many small towns that are disappearing. They even, gifting the house if you go live there. It's actually being reverted now. People can work from the small town in the middle of nowhere and have a global job, right? And
Yeah.
and so I think this enable a much more think to it, less CO2 production because it's less commutes. The big waste of these centralized offices that are powered night and day to keep them at the right temperature. I think it's just better for everybody. You can get closer to your family. You have local communities that thrive. I think that's the part that probably when you know, let's say 10 years ago when I was fully remote, I was more looking at the immediate benefit for myself, but I wasn't looking at the systemic. And I think what is very interesting, I follow a guy on LinkedIn, Nick Bloom, professor at Stanford, that has studied fully distributed work for the last 35 years. And he has all the numbers year on year. And one thing that is fascinating is there was this trend of more people going distributed already kind of in the past, growing maybe half a percentage point to a percentage point every year. And then indeed, we have the pandemic and it's this huge 40-50% increase of the population working remotely, and then pandemic ends, it goes down again. But now it's following, the parallel line. So it's still growing that half to 1%. Only we have gained 40 years. So in that 2 brief years of the pandemic, we have made a jump. And that jump now is continuing. So there's no way back, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And today I think talking about around 40 to 45% of the people working fully distributed between hybrid and completely distributed. And I think, to me, the most exciting part is we are already on par, if not more productive than full in office configuration. But full in office has had last 70, 80 years to develop the skills, the training, the concept, the tooling. We have probably started not even 10 years ago. So it's all to be developed, right? All the tooling is
Yeah.
still, frankly, not adapted. And so as new tools come up and new products and, new training, and the work that your team does, kind of develops, I'm sure we'll see kind of a blossoming. So, when I see my competitors going full office and returning everybody into the building, I'm so happy. They're just gonna go against the wall, and so we are gonna see all the upside. So it's for business leaders, it's just an opportunity of a lifetime. Together with AI on top of it, we can talk about it. It actually compounds it, and
Yeah.
so it's very, very exciting.
Well, so I have to tell you personally, I left. I was at a fintech company that went back all remote, and I was like, yeah, that's not really worth it for me. And I left, and I started deephumanx, right, an AI first company. And it's funny because I don't know if I actually really care about the remote or in person, because like I said, I like both. But I think it brings up an actual human leadership problem that many leaders don't want to look at, is that before the pandemic, we had 80-year history of this is the how we operate our business. Guess what? The pandemic disrupted that. So now when you come back to the office, you actually have to start looking at what are your models of operation? How are you managing differently? How are you coaching differently? How are you responding to change? Because, not only everyone going virtual, but with AI, things are changing much faster. And what used to be, as a leader, you could say, hey, I have a checklist. I need you to do these things. Now that's really considered lazy leadership, right? Like if you're not giving people not a checklist, but big concepts to tackle and letting them solve it. What do you think when I talk about the leadership model or the models of operation that businesses have to start looking at and changing? What do you think? Where do you think there's some opportunities there?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I feel very lucky because I started and learned management and leadership fully distributed. I never managed a team co-located with me, just because I was already remote when I started to become a manager. And so it's very interesting to me. I've observed, great remote and distributed managers are also great in-person managers. It doesn't work the other way. Why? Because managing remotely require you to play on the engagement level first and foremost, require you to use trust in a different way, require you to build accountability, responsibility. All these things you can kind of compensate when you are in person, even if you are not good, because you have presence, because you have control, because you have other mechanisms like social pressure. But let's also be frank, it's hugely discriminative. There are a set of, is one of the metrics that I like the most about fully distributed. The productivity of the US workforce has gone up by 12% because 10% more people are working. People with handicaps, people that had commitment at home, they couldn't go away commuting hours. This move, that 40% jump in the fully distributed work has brought in a new workforce, active workforce that was just at home doing nothing, and obviously stressed and all of that. And so I think as a leaders, it's the critical first element that is different is how you manage trust. In person, we have been used and trained on earning trust. You cannot do this remotely. It just doesn't work. Trust does not transmit, right? So you have to assume trust. You have to give it up front. Right? So when we hire people in our organization, the first day I have a call with them, and the first thing I tell them, I say, listen, you're starting in our company with 100% my trust. Now you can only lose it. By the way, why would you hire
That's
somebody?
actually how I work with my children. It's
Absolutely.
very
And so
similar,
so so
like management.
here is a couple of phenomenon, right? So number one, uh, people are wired psychologically to worry more about loss than gain. So they will be, you know, earning trust is something that brain does not compute. But losing trust, they will be very, very careful. So first there is this psychological layer. Then there is a layer of accountability and responsibility. If I tell you you need to earn my trust, you depend on me. Now you are a victim of my definition of giving you trust. While if I tell you you can lose my trust, well, it's up to you. It's your actions. You own now, what you're gonna do not to lose my trust. You already have it. So you don't have to identify what is that to give it to me. You already have it. You can only lose it. And so it's very empowering. That drives accountability. It drives responsibility by design, right?
Hmm.
Of course, you need to flip as a leader. You have to flip entirely your schema, right? You need to get up in the morning thinking that everybody in the company is doing the best for the company. You have to assume the positive intent. You don't have to think about, oh, this guy is trying to steal an hour and are sipping on the swimming pool. Who cares, right? We focus on the outcomes. Are they providing, whatever outcomes on objective you have agreed together to provide? If so, do they do it in 1 hour? Do they do it in 10 hours? Do they do it with AI? Do they do it at home? Do they do it in the Starbucks? Why do you care, right?
And
We
why
are
do you care? Like, that is something that
absolutely,
I feel like our society, we have to break up with working that way, right? For so long,
yeah,
everything has been linear and certainty and go to A, go to B, go to C. But guess what? With AI and just the changes, like that linear pathway, if that's how you're managing, you are already outdated and it's going to become that
yeah,
dysfunction
and
is going to be
what's I
brought to
think
our forefront really
I
quickly.
I find the fascinating when you hear these discussions, and you hear the post and you read the post on LinkedIn. Mostly the excuse are around number one, being together in the same place drive creativity because you hung up together at the water cooler and it comes these brilliant ideas of collaboration. A company that depends for innovation from serendipity, sorry, that's not business, right? I mean, this is casualty, right? It cannot be a company that succeeds systematically if you just have to hope that two people meet at the right time, having the right conversation. So let's remove this thing. It's completely disproved. Second thing, young people, new generation suffering because they cannot be mentored, right? I don't know I have a daughter, 18 years old. She never pick up a phone, right? She always chat, right? They
Yes.
love working in asynchronous mode, fully chat, and all of that. They have natively adopted this type of communication. I see the people that we hire, actually people that have experience and come into this model have more challenge than people from, coming out of school. Because once again, you come with certain set of habits, to your point, that are built on, training from the past and so on. They just don't fit the new model. While, scratch pad, new life, right? So even that, by the way, when people say, oh, but because they will get this mentoring, and then the people that have to provide the mentoring, they are at home because they work, the management is not in the office. It just doesn't make any sense anyway. So I think, let's be transparent. A need of control is a need of, you know, I don't like things are changing. There's a beautiful book that say "Who Moved My Cheese," right?
Oh, I
And it's
love that
about
book. That book has been
it's a fantastic
profound in
tale,
my life.
the fantastic tale. And I think we are exactly in that. The cheese has moved, and there are some people that have
Cheese has
gone
moved.
and are
Shy.
moving and are
Yeah.
going to take much better cheese, and other are there dying in that area, and it's generational probably, and some are more kind of available to others to improve. But I think we are in this transitional phase, and I think the it's, to me, I already see what it's going to be, in 10 years, and that's the exciting part. Transition
Yeah.
get to be managed. So,
And I think, like in our work at deephumanx, so we focus on the human operating
mhm.
system. We help executive teams and boards get beyond just using chatbot for individuals, but actually start implementing AI not as a product, something separate that my IT team is doing, but rather is part of your strategy. And one of the things that really keeps coming up that you just mentioned is the honesty that people have to say to themselves, right? Like you talked about giving trust. Well, you have to start with trusting yourself to say, hey, I don't like the change, but I'm going to just become aware and say it's happening. And maybe I don't know where I'm going. But that bit of uncertainty actually allows each of us as individuals through our human operating system to start actually activating more creativity. It allows us to become more vulnerable and really just more honest with what are the outcomes that we want teams to get to, but we have to start getting honest with ourselves too and saying, okay, right, things are changing. And generationally, that can be really hard, right? Like people in my generation, right, Gen X, we're like already thinking about retirement. So we don't necessarily want to change what we know. But at the same time, we have this conflict of when I started work 25 years ago, there was a lot of BS that's still hanging around, right? There was a lot of stuff that
This,
should have been out and left go
I,
that
I
we're seeing
find
younger
absolutely,
generation doing.
I find, exceptional that people are now kind of explaining how before the pandemic, you know, being in office was such a powerful. I mean, I remember those offices, right? These cubicles that nobody, loved, right? And there was all sorts of games and jokes about it, and Dilbert's, comic series and stripes. And then everybody now is saying about, the poor small businesses of the large cities that are suffering. I mean, till 10 years ago, big city was the problem, right? This
Yeah.
urbanization was actually a trend that everybody was trying to figure out how to fix it. And then, so everything that now, I think it's just, to me, is that back to that who moved my cheese. But, the AI point, I think, is very interesting, and people don't realize this. When you are in a fully distributed, mostly asynchronous uh, kind of setup of a company, everything go through electronic means. Either you have written chats, you have Google Meets and Teams and what have you. They mostly now being recorded and transcribed. All this is transferring company intellectual properties into content that the AI can assume and then be trained on and produce. If you have two people around the water cooler, who's recording that conversation?
Yes.
That thing that's been discussed, how it goes into the model, it's impossible. So the power for a company that is fully on electronic means is just is compounding by the hour, not even by the day, it's by the hour. Every hour recorded of communication within a company, it generates new opportunities. I mean, in our system, we have AI agent participating to our conversations. If you go on our Before.ai website, you actually can converse with our knowledge base. And you have
Yeah.
this agent that knows everything, and he learns from the other users that are using it. And he learns from us because he's watching on the conversation we have inside. All of these things are much more difficult in old brick and mortar people coming in the parking lot, walking and having a coffee, around the water cooler and so on. And it's just
There's a human celebration to, like, for many years it was, you really got to see all the intellectual capital that you have when you're in person, right? But with AI, like, I really like how you called that out. Like, right within an organization, everybody has this intellectual capital about how
absolutely.
you've worked, what hasn't worked. And that for many years has been the crux of a business,
Think,
staying
think it,
afloat
think
of
it
what the
from
problems are,
Think
right?
it from the other angle. When we lost an employees in the past because they were moving to another company, it was a huge problem because they went away with their tribal knowledge. Well, no more.
Yes.
If you now are properly doing your job in setting up the proper recording system and the proper AI training, the knowledge of the company keep compounding. You don't lose it because it's stored. And so I
Well,
think
even
it's a
using AI for the simplicity of, hey, I know this system. The number one use case of AI in 2024 was personal and business coaching.
Mhm.
Like that was the number one
Interesting.
use case, right? Which I think everyone can agree to. But even having that ability to go to like a chatbot and say, can you help me simplify what I know about this and this and this system? The importance of it. It can help you personally be able to communicate your intellectual capital to others, so that yes, it's recorded, but also like it helps you with with conveying and being more concise with really concept or
So
really
Lori,
concept.
I'm gonna tell you that you are already on the outdated, right? The current wave is actually getting on the call with the AI agent and having the conversation
Oh
and
yes,
basically
yes,
say,
yes,
so it's no more chat, there's no more writing. Writing is too slow.
yes.
So you keep speaking, you give it the toes, and the thing keep adding on top of it. Right? I have my daughter, 11 years old. Uh, she actually asked the LLM to ask her question because she's learning. You say, I'm learning this thing. What am I missing? And she start getting questions from the virtual teacher, and then she answer, and the LLM say, no, this is wrong. You need to learn these other things. And by the way, here is the content, and here is the image, and you can go on YouTube on this page. And she now, after it's about a year that she's doing this, she has a personalized one-to-one teacher that knows everything in the world. Of course, we need to stay on control because there are hallucination and all these things. But she loves it. She talked to it, at her tone, at her pace. And to me, just thinking what the ability that people will get, and this is a superhuman capabilities that we are gaining by the day. And again, for business leaders that do not empower their organization to profit of this, they're creating a huge, huge loss of value, and opportunity cost. It's just over the scale. So, but
Yeah, it's like
that's
I like the ease that you're bringing into it, and we our daughters are similar as an age because I have an 18-year-old and a
mhm,
12-year-old. She
okay,
just turned 12, so very
very
similar,
similar.
two girls. So that's cool. But I love like what you said. Like I actually think that technology in the future is going to become way more human, and we're going to see, like you said, just more interaction in our daily lives free of screens because of right being able to just talk to the chat bot and say, hey, what am I missing? Hey, what's my bias? I'll share with you. I've had some crazy prompts that I'm like, you just, I say, I'm thinking this. And because I have some customized chatbots as well, they're like, yeah, but you're coming from it from this perspective. It sounds like your wound is. And I'm like, how did you see inside of my head? But it's kind of a beautiful thing, but it is going to require us as human beings, and especially as leaders, like there is a demand now for us to be looking at how do I become myself a better human so I can lead better, because
I
you
have
can't a change if you don't know where
I've
to
come
anchor
I've
yourself.
come to a conclusion that is nowadays the new, to really get the most out of all the things we have discussed in the last 20 minutes. There is one competency that people have to build. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's anything that you can actually truly learn or build, and it's curiosity. Curiosity is
Curiosity, I
by
agree.
far the thing that powers and enable you to move to the next step, use all these tools, figure out ways to maximize them, learn more about new people, the new generation coming in the workplace, figure out how to work with, the new human operating system that you are referring to, right? The only doubt I have is that curiosity seems to be something that you build in the very early ages, and then you either have it or don't. And people that are not curious, can you really learn it? I don't know. I haven't seen that happening. So
See,
so
I
to me,
actually think like from the your adaptability, humans are the most adaptive species.
mhm,
We're the only species that works through storytelling. We're the only species that can predict the future. So I actually think that curiosity is innate in us. But what's interesting is that we also have our left and our right brain. Your left brain is very fear-based, very survival based. It's based on fear of like what could happen to you. And we live in a society that has really glorified, you need to think about this and that and this and that and put these boundaries around yourself. But every person in them has their right brain, which is really the adaptive, it's the thrive. Their survive left brain, thrive, not exactly linear like that, but right, but those are both two big systems. Where your thrive is where you get creativity, where you start to look at a more holistic picture, so you're less worried about the micro movements of yourself. And this goes to leaders specifically, of it's not about what you do actually the step. It's how is it fitting into the bigger picture? And that is something that everybody actually has the wiring for, but we don't practice it a lot. Some people don't practice it at all. And those skills in your human operating system are just like going to the gym. Like if you practice curiosity, just say to yourself, like, why do we keep coming to this same conclusion around, I don't know, this pogo report or whatever it is? Then you are practicing, not because of this and this and this, but why is that you're practicing your curiosity muscles. So I think that people are all curious. I just don't think that a lot of people have practiced it. And right, there's this, that's where there's a huge opportunity for leaders. Um, if you were to think about what the future of work looks like in 2 to 3 sentences, over the next 5 to 10 years, what would your prediction be?
And, we are a predictive security company, so the question is well posed. I would say just go before the there slash join, and you will see the definition because it's our culture model, is our way that we are setting up the company. I think it's going to be fully distributed, definitely no offices, but with extremely intentional gatherings where people do gather together on specific project, on specific conversations. You know, the fully distributed or even remote uh, does not prevent people to decide to meet, right? It's just that instead of by default being in-person meeting, face to face, you choose when to use that versus an online meeting, versus a chat, versus phone call, versus any other format that we may have. And so I think fully distributed, intentional, asynchronous, so that you enable multiple time zone people, across the globe, and then definitely with this concept of assumed intent, assumed intentionality, assumed positiveness, assumed trust. So rather than have to build up things, you start with a contract with the people that are in the company where everybody set the standards, and then we build on top of it. And so I think it's I see our team, and I see how rare for them is to find something similar outside. And I think for the one that embrace this innovation, there's a great world out there to discover.
I love it. And you really did start your whole conversation with something that I think is very futuristic in thinking, as is right, starting with joy, building for joy,
Hmm.
right? Like that is building for something bigger than any one person is way more rewarding for everybody, right? We all want productivity, we all want to make money, we all want efficiency, right? We want more time in our day, and having something like joy, that is a very futuristic, and it's inviting in the human element within the work world, right? That has been very logistic based. But just for my last question for you, because you have been super fascinating, when you think about, leading with joy, what do you think are the top 3 people skills that people should work on developing to remain relevant and impactful in this time of change?
But learning, by far, because we are in a continuous learning time. You cannot decide that you have enough. So that's being fast learner, learn in multiple ways, either by listening, by doing, by observing, by training. There are so many different ways. Second one is agility. So accept that things do not get to be completed 100%. Get to the 80%, be ready to move on. 50%, you see is not going in the right direction, move on, right? So, the sunk cost fallacy is probably one of the biggest problem that we have to
Mm.
face at the moment. So agility and that ability to accept that you may have wasted 3 days, and fine, move on. Don't waste another three on top of it, right? And then the third one I would say is it's really about this concept of trust in the others. I think um, you know we we don't often realize that 99% of the people in the world get up in the morning to do something good, not to be criminals or anything like that, right? And so why do we build systems for the 1% that start, the day thinking how they can, wreak havoc in our lives, and not build system to enable the 99% to be the most effective as possibly be, right?
Mm.
So I think, as when you get up in the morning and you have a project, you should think about, okay, let's not try to stop the bad to happen, but let's think, how we make the most out of this process, how we get the most out of it. And then, yes, of course, let's understand what are the criticalities and prepare for those criticalities so that if they ever happen, we can manage them. But the energy should be on the production, on the creation, on the innovation, on the best days are ahead kind of mindset.
Yes, on that thrive mindset versus the
Absolutely.
just survive, right? It's not about what could happen to you, it's about what could happen overall, right? Like your system will take care of you. Well, Luigi, it has been such a pleasure. You are a forward thinker. I
Thank you.
love where you're going. I feel like we got to talk about some really critical things, right, that are happening in the workplace today, and you've given some great advice for leaders, right, on how do you start thinking differently. Is there any place that the audience can go to connect with you, or that you might send them if they wanted to find out more information about you?
Absolutely. Just, LinkedIn, you'll find there's not many Luigis over there. And I'm very, very active, and I'd love to connect with more people and get into more conversation. And I definitely post regularly on this topic because, as you've seen, I'm very passionate about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your passion and thank you for being on Wired for Wonder.
Thank you, Laurie.
Take care.
Bye bye. Cheers.